And candidly, it can be a very challenging time. This was my 8th session total, 4 as a legislative aide and 4 as a member of the legislature. And it has certainly changed over those 8 sessions in terms of the partisanship, in terms of folks' willingness to work together and reach across the aisle. I do try to be pragmatic. I do try, just like my predecessors, Representative Porth, Representative Moskowitz, both try to, where possible, if we can work together and get something done and get good policy across the finish line, we will. But I will also stand up and fight when is necessary. And candidly, this last session and sessions before it, it has been very necessary. As Lucy knows and others, it's a challenging time in state government. And I'll tell you, that's what bothers me. That's what bothers me, because what folks don't realize is in those 60 days where you're working your legislation or you're working on passing the state budget, there are a lot of times where we agree. I would say about 96% of the time, Jason, 96, 97% of the time, we actually agree on the issues, and that whole board will light up green, all 120 members of the House and 40 members of the Senate. It is the 3% that we spend so much of our time fighting about, right? And those are the big, hot button, usually political, overtly political, in my opinion, in some cases, aim to ignite a fire in one party's base over the other. Those are the issues that bother me, right? I'm a fan of working together and getting things done for the people of Florida where we can. Because let me give you an example. How many of you have seen your property insurance rates increase? How many of you have been dropped by your insurer? Right? How many of you have struggled to find a place to live? How many of you have struggled to find a new place to rent when your lease comes due? How many of you have seen an increase in rent? How many of you have seen affordability issues when it comes to healthcare or even food, right? The basic essentials, right? The increase in price. So instead of focusing on things like that, those are the issues that I call the kitchen table issues. Those are the things that I think folks are sitting down at their kitchen table talking about over dinner, right? Those are the things that worry real Floridians, not some of the partisan nonsense fights that we get into in Tallahassee. And so while my goal tonight is to address any of your concerns, any questions that I can, and paint it with a broad, bipartisan as possible brush, I am an elected Democrat. And a lot of what has gone on in Tallahassee, candidly, is abhorrent. We waste taxpayer dollars, we waste time in session fighting different groups of people. And that's been deeply troubling the last couple of years, and candidly, I think it's gotten worse. As you all know, it's no longer a secret, our governor is running for president. And so I think the people, I think Floridians suffer when that happens, when we let the partisanship and the games kind of get in the way. So we've spent session on things like an E-Verify bill, immigration bill, banning books from classrooms, any number of LGBTQ, anti-LGBTQ bills, an anti-abortion bill, actually that got worse than previous versions of the bill, right? So we're not focusing on property insurance. We're not focusing on affordable housing. For the first time in years, we did pass an affordable housing bill this year, but it's not nearly enough. It's a step in the right direction, and I'm happy to go into it if anybody wants to know, but there's more to be done. And so I think what I'll do is rather than kind of go through each controversial issue that we saw this year, I'll give you kind of a broad brush of what I was able to work on this last legislative session. I'm proud to say that in my 4 years in the legislature, I've passed about 16 pieces of legislation for a Broward Democrat. Candidly, that's significant. Not to toot my own horn, it's just a very difficult place to move bills with a D next to your name. And those bills range. A lot of the time they focus on public safety, they focus on school safety. Lucy knows I'm a graduate of Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. I was there the day of the shooting. Within about 15 minutes, I've known folks like Aaron Feist since I was 15 years old. And so a lot of what I work on in Tallahassee is preventing something like the shooting at my alma mater, right? Dissecting what went wrong that day and trying to pass legislation to prevent it. I'll give you an example. The first session we did, Alyssa's Law, named after Alyssa Aladeff, puts a panic alarm in every school in this state, and also included $8 million in starter funding to make that happen. Because what we realized went wrong on that day was, folks, what happens if you're sitting in a classroom and somebody pulls a fire alarm? What does that tell you to do?
Get out.
Get out, right? Leave the building. Well, that's the exact opposite of what you want to do in an active shooter situation, right? And so it dawned on me, I was working with my colleague, Representative Gottlieb, who represents the district just to the south, on the bill, and it dawned on me how vitally important it really was when I walked around the Capitol building and there were panic alarms in the Capitol building. But not in schools, not to protect our kids. And so that is a good piece of legislation we were able to get through a bipartisan, I think it was even unanimous fashion, provided the funding. That's just one example of what we worked on. This last session, I've got 3 bills that I'd like to talk about that we were able to get across the finish line. The first deals with the Florida National Guard. I don't know if you know this, but we have a woefully small National Guard for the size of our state. So the state of Florida has over 22 million people. We have a National Guard force of 12,000. To put that into perspective, the state of Alabama, nothing against Alabama, anybody from Alabama? To put that in perspective, the state of Alabama has 5.5 million residents. They have 12,000 National Guardsmen and women, right? We have much more coastline, more propensity, rather, for natural disaster, and we have a woefully small National Guard. So I have worked with our National Guard the last couple of years to urge Congress to increase the size of our National Guard because they're the only ones that can do it. I've also passed, this last year, we passed a bill that creates the JEEP program, which is basically an incentive-based program for members of the Guard, former members of the Guard, to recruit friends and family members, and provides an incentive for them to do so. Because what we're also having trouble doing, not only do we have a small Guard, but we're having trouble even hitting the numbers that we're authorized to have, right? Because folks realize how much more work there is to do in the National Guard. Any veterans in the room? Veteran service members, family of veterans and service members? Yeah, thank them all, and thank you for your service. I'll tell you what's difficult and what's unique about the setup of the National Guard is they are both able to be federally activated, meaning under the command of the President as Commander-in-Chief and sent across the globe. The state of Florida has Florida National Guards men and women in 5 of the 6 combatant commands around this planet, keeping us safe. But then at home, they can also be activated for things like COVID-19, for things like hurricanes and all the normal things that you would think, right? But what that means is these same 12,000 people are getting churned again and again and again and deployed here and sent there, right? And they're getting burnt out, and so they're not re-upping. And so we're having real recruitment and retention issues. That's a lot of what I've focused on because I think it makes our state less safe. So I'm proud to say that program has gone into the budget, has gone into the budget and provided $3 million in funding for our National Guardsmen and women as well. The second one I want to touch on, and if you are on my email list, I'm sorry, you've probably heard about this issue a lot. I like good government, particularly at the local level, particularly at the just under the city level. These are known as special districts, special taxing districts. You may live in one. In one part of my district, there are 4 for one city. There are 4 special districts. These are basically quasi-governments that have, in some cases, multi-million-dollar budgets, and they are overseen by members of the public who, in my opinion, are not actually elected, right? I stand for election every 2 years. I'm on a ballot. There's one person, one vote. You can vote for me or you can not vote for me. Hopefully you vote for me, right? They don't do it that way. They do it based on proxy vote of largest landowner, meaning if you own 10 acres, you get 10 votes, right? And that's who controls these multi-million-dollar budgets. So I've worked time and again to try and change the mechanism for voting, but this year it was more in the ethics realm because we found out that one of these districts was actually heavily involved in self-dealing, where the director of the district was giving themselves millions of dollars over the last 10 years in contracts of the ratepayer dollars, right? Problematic? The problem was the board members who were elected were never sitting through an ethics training. Your local government, your local elected officials, your mayor, your city commissioner, they all have to sit through annual ethics trainings. There's no such training at that lower level. Thanks to a bill that I was fortunate to work with Representative Huchowski on this year, that is now going to be law. And they will also have to understand what is right and what is wrong and who should and should not be self-dealing. So that's another piece of legislation. But I want to go ahead and open it up, and I'll actually go ahead and turn it back over to the commissioner. And I'll mention a couple other things as we go along, but I'm really curious to get your questions and your feedback from this legislative session. But ultimately, it's an honor to serve. This is if you can believe it, my 10th year as an elected official, and I have the receding hairline and the gray hair to prove it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Commissioner Guzman, and we can take it from there. Thanks, everybody.